I built that bridge with my own hands. Not for decoration, not for show, but because the stream that runs through my land splits it right down the middle. One side holds the barn, the other side leads to the fields. Without that bridge, I can't even move equipment across. So when I found it gone, not damaged but completely removed, every plank, every bolt, every rail vanished, I stood there in disbelief. Then I saw the tire tracks. A set of deep, wide impressions in the dirt, leading to where the bridge used to be. Someone had come here with machinery. Heavy machinery. And I knew instantly, this wasn't some random act. Someone wanted it gone. When I called the sheriff's office, they sent a deputy out. He took one look at the mess and said, "Looks like someone used a small excavator or loader to pull it apart." I asked, "Any idea who'd do something like this?" He shrugged. "Could be a contractor, could be someone from the HOA." I blinked. HOA? I'm not even part of one. He raised a brow. That's what everyone says. Later that day, a white SUV rolled up to my property line, slow and deliberate. The kind of slow that tells you they want to be seen. The window rolled down, and out came that sharp, smug tone I recognized from town meetings. "Excuse me, you can't just build unauthorized structures across community land." I stared at her. "Community land? This is my property. Has been for 23 years. She smiled in that polished way people do when they think they have power over you. "The HOA decided your bridge was a hazard and had it removed. You'll receive a notice." I felt my pulse rise. I told her, "There must be some mistake. This isn't HOA land." But she just tilted her head, like I was the one confused. "Well, it's within the boundary now. The development extended its jurisdiction last year. We mailed you the notice." I stepped closer. "I didn't get any notice. And you can't just take my bridge." She sniffed. "We can. And we did. Safety reasons. You're welcome." And with that, she drove off, leaving me standing in the mud, my bridge gone, my patience gone with it. I went back to the county records office the next morning, determined to prove her wrong. The clerk pulled up the property maps, old and new. The screen flickered between two sets of borders, and that's when I saw it. The HOA had quietly redrawn their boundary lines last year. My parcel, which used to be clearly separate, now had a faint shaded overlap at the edge, right where the stream ran through. They claimed environmental access to the creek, which, apparently, they thought gave them the right to claim the bridge too. When I asked who approved this, the clerk gave me a long sigh. "They filed an annexation request," she said. "No one objected during the notice period, so it was approved automatically." I laughed bitterly. "No one objected because no one told me." The clerk hesitated, then whispered, "You're not the first person to come in angry about this HOA. They've been pushing those lines for years." That night, I sat in my living room with the original property deed, the plat maps, and the latest county filings spread across the table. Every document told the same story: they had no right to remove that bridge. It wasn't just theft, it was trespassing, vandalism, and an abuse of power. I thought about calling a lawyer right then, but I knew what would happen. They'd drag it out, rack up fees, and by the time justice came around, they'd already have built something new over my land. So I decided to gather evidence first. I walked back to the stream with a flashlight, took photos of the torn-up ground, the disturbed soil, even a few small metal fragments they'd left behind. When the beam of my flashlight caught something shiny in the dirt, I crouched down. It was a tag. A small metal plate stamped with the name of a local construction company. They must have used their equipment to take the bridge apart. That was my proof. The next morning, I drove straight to that company's office. The receptionist looked up, nervous when I mentioned the HOA. "Oh, yeah," she said, glancing toward the back office. "They contracted us for some removal work." "Why?" I told her, "Because you destroyed private property." The owner came out, clearly defensive. "We were hired by the Greenview HOA. They said it was their property. We just followed orders. I asked, "Did you check the ownership records?" He shrugged. They showed us a map, said the bridge was encroaching. I'm not a lawyer, man. That was when I realized the HOA had orchestrated this perfectly. They used vague maps, manipulated legal language, and leaned on authority people rarely question. I went home furious but strangely focused. I printed every document I had and started building a timeline. Every permit, every notice they claimed to send, every change in boundary lines. And the deeper I dug, the more twisted it got. Turns out, the HOA president, the same woman who confronted me, had been lobbying the county for months to get that creek labeled as a, quote, community easement. She claimed it was for environmental safety, but in reality, it allowed her to expand HOA jurisdiction by a few dozen feet. That expansion cut into my property by roughly 25 feet, just enough to touch the bridge, just enough for her to claim control. She didn't care about safety. She wanted control. She wanted to show the neighborhood, and probably me, that her word was law. I remembered something she said at a town meeting months ago. We all benefit when everyone plays by the same rules. That was her philosophy. And in her mind, my independence, my refusal to join their HOA, pay their dues or follow their arbitrary rules, was an act of rebellion. But she didn't understand one thing. This wasn't a neighborhood argument over paint colors or fence height. This was property law. And she had just crossed a line that wasn't hers to cross. I called my attorney after that. He listened carefully, then said, "If you've got proof of ownership and removal without consent, you've got a case. But it's gonna get messy." I told him, "Messy's fine. They wanted a fight, they're about to get one." Before we filed anything, though, he advised me to get an independent land survey done to establish the official boundaries before they could change anything else. So I hired a licensed surveyor, and when he came out with his equipment, he confirmed it right there. The creek, the land, the area where the bridge stood, it was all mine. Not an inch of it fell under HOA jurisdiction. He gave me the certified report, signed and sealed, and I felt a small surge of relief. But then, a few days later, I got a letter in the mail, stamped with the HOA logo. Notice of violation. It read, "Unauthorized reconstruction of a structure on HOA easement territory will result in fines and potential legal action." They were threatening me again, this time for trying to rebuild the bridge that they destroyed. I hadn't even started rebuilding. They were watching me, monitoring my property. That's when it clicked. They weren't just power hungry, they were trying to force me into compliance, make me so frustrated, so cornered, that I'd eventually agree to join their HOA to stop the harassment. It was psychological warfare disguised as bureaucracy. But I didn't fold. Not this time. I started documenting everything, even the HOA board's public meetings. I found that several members had conflicts of interest. One of them owned shares in the construction company that tore down my bridge. Another had family working in the county zoning office. Every thread I pulled led to another layer of corruption, and I wasn't going to stop until the whole thing unraveled. When I finally confronted the HOA president again, she didn't look as smug this time. I caught her off guard outside one of their community meetings, papers in my hand, evidence neatly stacked and marked. "You had no right," I said quietly, almost calmly. "You trespassed, destroyed property, and fabricated jurisdiction." She crossed her arms, feigning confidence. "We acted within our authority." I handed her the certified survey. "Then explain this. My bridge was on my land. The survey proves it. You owe me $25,000 in damages and a public apology." For a moment she said nothing. Then, instead of responding like a professional, she smiled. That same tight, brittle smile that cracks when someone realizes they've lost control, and said, "You'll regret making enemies in this neighborhood." That told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't backing down, she was doubling down. The next week, things escalated. I started finding letters taped to my gate. Anonymous complaints about noise, about, quote, property maintenance violations. about unauthorized structures. One of them even claimed I was housing livestock without approval. On a farm. My farm. I laughed the first few times, but then I noticed the tone of the letters getting darker, more personal. They were trying to paint me as a public nuisance. So I played along, publicly polite, privately gathering ammunition. I called a local reporter who'd written about HOA disputes before and told him everything. I showed him the survey, the photos, the letters, even the construction tag I'd found. He looked over the stack of papers and said, "This is good. People need to see this. But you sure you want to poke the bear?" I smiled. "Oh, I'm not poking. I'm removing its teeth." The article came out a few days later. HOA accused of trespassing and property damage in questionable boundary expansion. It spread faster than I expected. Neighbors started asking questions. Homeowners who'd been afraid to speak up suddenly began sharing their own stories. Unauthorized fines, unfair enforcement, property access issues. Within a week, the HOA board was flooded with angry emails and calls demanding transparency. That's when the retaliation started. I woke up one morning to find tire spikes scattered across my driveway. Another morning, the gate I'd installed years ago was left open, my cattle wandering near the road. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. Someone wanted to provoke me into losing my temper. But I didn't bite. I installed cameras instead. High resolution, motion activated, with cloud backups. And sure enough, 2 nights later, I caught her. The HOA president herself, sneaking along the edge of my property, flashlight in hand, taking photos of my barn. She must have thought she could gather evidence for some bogus violation. But the footage told a different story. She was trespassing. I printed a still image and mailed it straight to her. No note, no message. Just the photo, time-stamped and signed. A few days later, I received an email, not from her, but from the HOA's lawyer. The subject line read, "Cease and desist." The body claimed I was harassing board members and violating community peace. I laughed out loud. They were trying to flip the narrative. Classic deflection. But the funny thing about truth is, once it starts spreading, it's hard to contain. The county inspector came next. They'd been alerted to potential code violations on my land. He arrived expecting a mess. Instead, he found a well-maintained property, clean paperwork, and a landowner who knew his rights. After a brief walkthrough, he shook his head and said, "I've seen this before. They're trying to bury you in bureaucracy." I asked, "And what happens now?" He smiled faintly. Now I file a report, and you make sure to get a copy." By then, I'd started building my own paper wall, photos, reports, legal notices, recordings, emails. Every move they made became another piece of evidence. And then came the turning point, a public county hearing about boundary clarification. It was supposed to be routine. But I showed up, documents in hand, with the reporter sitting in the front row. When it was my turn to speak, I laid it all out: the illegal annexation, the destruction of private property, the harassment. People in the room went silent. The HOA board members sat stiff, eyes darting toward each other. When I revealed that their president had been caught trespassing on camera, the crowd gasped. The county chair looked furious. "Is this true?" he asked the HOA representatives. They stumbled over words, throwing around phrases like misunderstanding and, quote, community safety. But the damage was done. The chair ordered an immediate review of the HOA's jurisdiction filings. 2 weeks later, the county released their findings. The HOA had indeed exceeded its legal boundaries, misrepresented property lines, and authorized actions on land they did not own. My bridge, my land, everything they touched, all of it confirmed to be outside their authority. The county revoked their annexation approval, fined them for false filings, and ordered them to compensate me for property damage. When I got the letter confirming the ruling, I just sat there, staring at it for a long while. Relief, anger, satisfaction, all tangled together. It wasn't just about the bridge anymore. It was about principle, about standing up when everyone else told you it's easier to just go along. But it didn't end there. The HOA president resigned quietly a few days later, citing, quote, personal reasons. Of course, she didn't apologize. She didn't have to. Her silence was proof enough. The rest of the board scrambled to contain the fallout. New leadership promised, quote, reform and better communication. The usual PR language. I didn't care. I'd won. I rebuilt the bridge myself that spring, stronger, wider, anchored deeper into the ground. It wasn't just a way to cross the creek anymore. It was a symbol of every time someone tried to tell me I didn't belong, and I proved them wrong. Neighbors stopped by sometimes to watch me work. Some of them, once afraid of the HOA, started talking openly now about the fees, the threats, the manipulation. I told them the same thing every time. They only have as much power as you give them. When the last board was laid, and I took that first walk across the new bridge, I felt something shift inside me. The fear, the frustration, gone. Replaced by something quiet and solid. You can take a man's bridge, but not his ground. And that's what they never understood. A few months later, I heard that the county launched a full audit into the HOA's past filings. Turns out, my case wasn't the first, or the last. They'd overreached multiple times, but no one had ever fought back. Until now. My story became the spark that lit up the whole mess. Sometimes, people think power comes from titles or boards or committees. But real power comes from resolve, from knowing that the truth, once uncovered, can't be buried again. And as for my bridge, it stands there now, as solid as ever. A reminder that no one, not even a self-appointed Karen, with a clipboard and a title, can erase what's rightfully yours.